and it does look like they are working, right? So let's get on to it for today. And I'm just trying to make sure that we've got everything that we need. And if you're never been here before, this is what we do. We talk about anything and everything around real estate. Particularly today, we are going to be talking the conversation of who needs to be paying for the conveyancing fees. It is by law that you and I know that as a buyer, you need to be paying for the conveyancing of the property. So when a property is taking transfer, you need to pay for it. But who appoints it? It is by law that it needs to be appointed by the person who is selling the property. Whoa! I've heard many stories. I've lost so much money. I've lost, that process. There is something wrong with that process. And I just want us now to kind of like zoom in into it a little bit and unpack it a little bit for the next around about 45 minutes to an hour, unpacking to see whether what can we do? Is there something else that we can do? And if this is your first time, welcome. In the comments, you can tell me where you're watching me from. So that's the first thing that we like to do. And I'm trusting that you can hear me nice and loud. I am nicely audible. If not, right? So someone says, Ayanda Mazibuku says, M5 changed my life. Thanks you guys. Keep up the great work and educating us. That's what it's all about. So great. Ayanda can hear us there. Right, so let's go on, right, to talk about this conversation. Let's see here. Let's go on to talk about this conversation. If you have been buying properties and you're doing this on a regular basis, you would know that it is a pain sometimes to deal with unprofessional conveyancers out there that kind of like just don't do their work. And what can you do if you have found yourself to be in that predicament? And today, I want you to jump into the conversation actually, and you need to help me here. It's opeNMic. So as an opeNMic, you get to ask questions and I get to answer as I go along. But in particular, let's jump into the process of buying a house in South Africa right now, or a property. It's not about a house, it's about a property. Right. The process of buying a property in South Africa is that when you are buying a property, you don't exchange money with the seller. So there is the seller and there's you who's the buyer. And I'm just going to try to keep it a little bit neat here so that everyone else can follow. So you've got a buyer and you've got a seller. The seller, when they are selling, normally they will appoint an estate agent, and the estate agent comes through with an offer to purchase. And on top of that, when you have now put in your offer, let's assume this property is on R1 million, and you're now putting an offer of, let's say, how much? Let's say 500,000. Can that happen? Yes, it can happen, but that's a video for another day on how you can do that. But there's plenty of videos that are on here that can also educate you the same thing. Nonetheless, you're putting an offer now. And with that offer, you go in and you say to them, well, I'd like to put in an offer. There is a person who then manages, or should I say a profession, who then manages the process of this transaction. So we don't exchange money. The seller, we don't exchange the 500,000. Let's just take an example, but this was a cash offer. This was a cash offer. You give you 500,000. What is the process? What then happens thereafter? You've put in an offer, isn't it? When you're putting an offer, the estate agent is going to ask of you to write documentation. There is a documentation that you need to fill in. And that's called the offer to purchase. On the offer to purchase, somewhere on the offer to purchase, I don't know how to stress this out. It is extremely important that whenever you're doing an offer to purchase, or whenever you're doing anything around an offer to purchase, it is important that whenever you're doing a contract, actually, I just want to stress out the fact that it is important that you read what it says. If you don't read what it says, then obviously for that reason, you're just signing in. And what are you signing in for? Who knows? Now, on the offer to purchase, there is a section normally, I don't want to say normally it's at the top or it's at the bottom, but it is there. And that section will speak about the person who is going to be the conveyancer, the attorney, the legal person who is going to manage this process. So in a nutshell, all properties that are registered in South Africa, they are registered at what we call the deeds office. At the deeds office, that's where the register of all the properties are. So each property has kind of like its own unique number there at the deeds office. And that deeds number, obviously, that's what we call the title deed. Now, what then happens is that the conveyancer is supposed to go and ask the seller for the title deed. If the house or property is owned cash, the owner of the house should have the title deed. Should have the title deed, right? I'm going to repeat should, because I have seen many properties out there that don't have a title deed. They've lost it, right? Especially inherited properties, especially properties that has been owned for a long time. Then what happens? I think we have done a video like that on how you can actually rectify that, because that was also a problem that I encountered not so long ago. A couple of times actually this year, I encountered that. I want to remind you that as we go along, remember you can ask questions around anything and everything that we are talking about today. And today we are talking about, in particular, is it fair actually for the buyer to pay for conveyancing fees, yet the conveyancer is actually appointed by the seller? So is it fair? And what could go wrong? And what do we need to be watching out for? Right. And today I'm just going to share all of my stories that I've had. I think 2 important stories that I've seen working with the conveyancer of the seller. And I'll never ever do that again. Right. I'll never ever do that again. Now, so we were talking about the process. So what now happens is that the conveyancer will get the title deed from the person, and from there on, what they will do from the seller, and they will go to the deed office now and request to lodge the paperwork. So they ask of your paperwork, they ask of the seller's paperwork, and they prepare some documentation where you need to sign. These documents are called transfer documents, right? So transfer document, we are now transferring the name from TJ, who is the seller, and to John, who is the buyer. And obviously, that's the overlap there. And that's the conveyancer's job, right? To take transfer of these two. Once that is done, the money is generally sitting with the conveyancer. So they're going to ask you of the money at some point. They're going to ask you of that 500,000 to say, hey, before we go and lodge, where is the 500,000? And you need to actually then provide that 500,000. And then at that time, that's when they're going to go in and lodge. But also, they might ask for their services fee. And that's called transfer costs. Transfer costs include quite a number of things. Things like taxes, stamps, and all of those things. But it doesn't matter here what we're talking about. But what it matters is that there's what is called transfer fees. A lot of people get stuck here because when they're going into a deal, they don't know that there's this transfer fees. So they get stuck there for a long time. Then they start borrowing money from left, right, center. I've seen this. But once we are here now, the property now is taking transfer. And what now happens is that the conveyancer goes in to lodge the property. It should happen like that, as smooth as I've just explained it now. But, I buy many properties. I've been buying properties left, right, center, and it's normally not the case. It does not happen that smooth. Right. So do you actually think that, I've certainly been bent with incompetent conveyancers, right, that have just slowed down the process, or they did something wrong, or the paperwork was not in place. There are so many stories that I can tell you guys, but I want to hear from you whether you have actually bought a property and you got the runaround from the conveyancers, right? Not the seller, from the conveyancer themselves. What is it that you have experience. So right now, I want you to jump in your comments and indicate no name shaming here. I'm just talking about what happened. That's what I want you to hear. But I want to give you guys my experience, one of my experience, and I don't think it's, for me personally, I just want you to put it out there that I don't think it is fair that I get to pay for a service and yet someone else is choosing to appoint who that service provider should be. I don't think it's fair. I don't know. What do you guys think, right? I want to hear from you in the comments. So once you're telling me your experience, maybe if you haven't had an experience, do you actually think that it is fair, right, that I get to pay for a service, but yet someone else is choosing a service provider for me? I just think that it's unfair. It's an unfair practice there. That's what I think. But I'm not a lawmaker. I'm just talking from a perspective of I am the one who is buying the property. Why then did the legal body assume and put in a law that actually, not really a law, but it's a recommendation here, that in normal cases, the seller should be choosing the conveyancer? Well, the seller is the one who is selling their property here. That's where the asset is, right? So that's why in normal cases where you get to have the seller to choose their conveyancer there. And that's the reason there, right? So I'm asking here, what kind of challenges have you had with what kind of experience have you had? If you had a great experience, just drop it in the comments there. TJ, I've had a great experience with my conveyancer. Maybe we can actually talk about who that conveyancer is, right? Okay, what about if, so I want to jump into my comments here, right? And some of the things that I want actually to dive in here, right? What is the real challenge for what I'm saying here? Remember, I'm saying that I don't think it's fair. So if it is fair, what is the real challenge? The real challenge is that if I am in this particular deal and I'm the one who's going to pay, and yet the seller is the one who is going to choose the service provider, I actually think that in that regard, the seller, or should I say the conveyancer, is working for the seller. So for that reason, the conveyancer he doesn't have, or she doesn't have any interest in me, right? It is a non-factor that if anyone appoints you, then you're going to listen to that person, isn't it? So for argument reason, is the conveyancer really working for me here in this case, or the conveyancer is working for the seller? Even though I'm the one who's paying, but they're actually working for the seller, isn't it? So for that reason, they're going to listen more kind of like what is who's appointed them. So if they ask them to delay, they're going to delay because it's their seller. I mean, it's their conveyancer, isn't it? And I'm the guy who's paying. I think it's fair. But nonetheless, let's go on. So my biggest problem is that the conveyancer is not working for me. That's my biggest seller, right? I'm not the client and the client is the seller. It is a challenge. That is a challenge on its own there. The other challenge is that we should also realize that, when this was put in place, who was being protected here, right, for us to choose the conveyancer to be appointed by the seller? It is obviously the one who is selling their property. That's why the law kind of like favors them to appoint. But can I change that process? I want us to speak into that a little bit later. But in the meantime, I also want to stress out another point which is a challenge to me. The fact that we do have the conveyancer being chosen by the seller, even though I am paying, it takes me out of control. Yeah, it does. It takes me out of control. And for that reason, I am not actually able to do anything, right? I can jump, I can scream, I can send emails, I can put them on terms. Oh, by the way, something that we're going to talk about, what is putting someone on terms, right, when you're doing a transaction. I want to stress out here, each deal, each offer to purchase comes with its own like terms and conditions, and it's extremely important that you read these terms and conditions, because in the terms and conditions, that's where you are going to start seeing the loopholes, or should I say, when we are putting someone on terms, what are the terms that we're going to be putting in. So before shortly I jump on to tell you a story, a real life story that happened where I was buying a house, but the seller actually were buying another house somewhere else, and that house was not ready, and they started stalling the transfer of the property that I was buying from them. And what happened? I'm going to tell you that story a little bit, but let me jump on to maybe the comments. Let's hear on the comments here. Percy, good morning. How you doing, man? And Percy says, hi, TJ. How long does it take to get the letter of executorship? Oof, yo. It's kind of like, how long is the string, man? It really depends here, Percy. Yeah, it really depends. There's lots of circumstantial issues here, but I mean, I'm not saying that then it should be taking about a year to do it. I think reasonable time should be a month to about three months, somewhere there. But I think your question is really directed to something else there. Maybe you might want to elaborate a little bit more so that we can dig into that. Executorship is, when there's a deceased estate and things like that. But let's jump on to what I was talking about right here. I don't see any other comments. If there is any other comments, questions, please do jump in there. Right, so I was buying a property out in an area in the east, right? And basically what happened here was that these guys here were dependent on my offer to purchase for them to actually buy another property. So for that reason, what they had done is they had put in a condition on their on selling their buying another house on the conditions that this one was sold. So I didn't know that. That was their transaction that I didn't know about. So I came in, and when I came in, I put in my offer, and what happened was that they didn't have cash to pay for the transfers. So we were now trying to make sure that we move into the property, and the deadlines that we have put into the conditions, these were coming to an end. But what then happened was that between them and their conveyancer, the guy whom I was paying started delaying the transaction. So they started coming up with all sorts of issues on all the things that needs to be done. The first issue that they came up with was that they were not able to find the COC. The COC was done apparently, but they were saying that they couldn't find the copy. So between the conveyancer and the seller, they were saying that no, the COC was done, but we can't find it, so for that reason we can lodge. In the meantime, I had paid transfer fees. I had gotten through my bond. My bond was ready. It was been granted. And my deposit, I had actually paid the deposit. Who had I paid the deposit to? To the same conveyancer who was working for the seller. Was my money still there? I don't know. It's just as good as, you and I asking that question, We don't know. Maybe was it there, maybe it wasn't. I don't know, right? Or maybe they had paid on to the other house that they were wanting to buy. I don't know. Well, these are human beings, and we're talking about what can happen here, right? So we're speculating on what could have happened. Why were they stalling that the COC? For 3 months, they were going back and forth. And then eventually I said, can I then do my COC? Where is this electrician that you guys got the COC from? Can we call them? And then eventually somewhere along the line, they started talking about the electrician is in hospital, he's not working. And I'm like thinking, okay, but I'm sure he's a company, so isn't there someone else in their company who can also issue the same? And only to hear that, no, the guy is a solo professional, and he doesn't have a company, so waiting for him. And I was like, no, man, that's BS. If this has been issued, we're going to take in onto our own hands, and we are going to come in and ask our other electrician to actually do the COC. And at that time, all of a sudden, the copy was found. But guess what? We had wasted 3 weeks, right? And then eventually we were told that no, the seller's wife is out of the country, so they can't sign, right? And another 2 months went by. And then we're asking, so where is the seller's wife? In the UK. Oh, okay, great, no problem. Why don't we send the paperwork to them in the UK and then they can sign there in front of an attorney, right? It's a solution that we were trying to put onto the table. But this was after months, right? But in all actual effect, when we really looked into the transaction in hindsight, I actually realized that between the conveyancer and the seller, the two of them were actually in cahoots. They were delaying the process because they were trying to get the other transaction where these guys were going into another place. And yet my money was at stake here. So it wasn't fair. Eventually, somewhere along the line, I went to Elise and I said to Elise, look, what can we do here? And this deal is just stalling and stalling. And Elise said to me, no, let's look at the contract. And when we looked at the contract, we actually realized that we could put them on terms. Put them on terms is that you raise a certain clause within the contract, and you put them on terms to say, by X date, this should be done, and you pick that clause in there. So, for instance, if your transfer was supposed to be now happening at the end of the month, so you put them on condition to say that it's either you can pull out or so you can't. That's what's called putting on terms. But there's many ways you can put them on terms on. One needs to be looking at the conveyancer with the contract in place, and then that's how you can put them on in terms. But then I want to ask another thing, or should I say I want to talk about another thing. Having had this horrific story, right? Like nobody wants to go through that. So in total, this deal kind of like took us about 8 months eventually for us to actually move into the property. And the money that we had put in there, it wasn't working for us. It wasn't working for me, right? The attorney was giving me around about 7% return on my money, interest, and I could have been using my money elsewhere, right? Remember, it was a cash deal. So for that reason, come on, man. You're losing out on the opportunity of money. That's something else there that you can never get back. So the question then I want to ask is that, so can you actually choose your own conveyancer? Right? That's the question that I want to ask. And for you guys that are listening in, and I want to ask that question, can you actually choose your own conveyancer? I saw Ayanda who's here, and Percy who's here, and some of the other guys also that I'm seeing that they are live. So the question that I want to ask of you guys, and in the comments in there, do you think that you can choose your own conveyancer? Right? Do you think that you can choose your own conveyancer? And I'm going to drink a little bit of water. I got my big bottle here that I drink water. I kill a couple of these ones per day. Yeah. Okay. No one is giving us some comments in there for now. But let's go ahead anyway. I thought I could give you a moment to ask those questions there, to answer my question in terms of do you think you can actually choose your conveyancer? I mean, it's not a right or wrong answer. So let's unpack that a little bit. All right. In the right way of buying a property, which is dictated, Ayandeja has just said yes, you can. Awesome stuff, and I want to jump into how can you do it actually. But I want to zoom into the conversation of, can you actually choose your own conveyancer? The answer is yes. Yes, you're very right. All of you guys, you're very right. Why would you want to do that? Obviously, to turn the table so that the conveyancer can work for you, isn't it? So in my world, when I started doing this property investing, like on a serious note, I didn't have a conveyancer, so I know conveyancer was working for me directly. But guess what? You can actually approach any conveyancer, and you can build a relationship with them. Remember, they're just as a person like you and me, and you can build a relationship, and you can, especially if you're kind of like an investor, you're serious about this journey here. And you can say to them, look, I'm always buying properties and I want you to handle my conveyancing. Is it okay if I kind of like start putting in your name so that all the paperwork for my buying of properties comes through to you? And the answer is they'll probably say yes. And when they say yes, and maybe if you do one deal, 2 deals, 3 deals with them, you can now start asking for maybe a little bit of a discount and things like that. And maybe before you even ask for a discount, they might as well grant you the discount. Right. So how do you get it right? So I've got about 5 tips that I want to share with you guys in terms of how can you actually get it right in terms of making sure that on the OTP, you can put in your own conveyancer, right? I want to say it is as a rule of thumb, the seller is the one who's supposed to choose the conveyancer. But I want to give you 5 tips on how you can actually reverse that. Right. Tip number 1 is, in many cases, right, the seller, when they are selling their property, they're not even thinking about conveyances and things like that. Normally, what will happen is that the estate agent will come in with their own team, with their conveyancer. So if you are to befriend, or should I say, if you are in good books with the estate agent, at that particular time, what you can do is that when you're befriending your estate agent, you now need to indicate to your estate agent that you have your own conveyancer. However, if the seller insists to have their own conveyancer, does it mean that you can now have 2 conveyancers on the same transactions? Not necessarily so, because there's only one conveyancer who is needed to actually effect the actual transaction. You can bring in your own, but you're going to pay them. But what are you really paying them for, right? So, but with the example that I've given you, where you can actually influence the estate agent, because the estate agent is in good books with you, you're buying more properties from them, then for that reason, you can tell them that upfront, I am going to use Bruno Simao, I am going to use Dykes van Wyk, I'm going to use Ramampele Mampele, or I'm going, whatever attorneys that you're going to be using who are out there, right? So for me, I've got Elise. Elise, she works, she's my direct business partner. I do business with her, and she's an attorney by profession. So I use her for conveyancing purposes. So every transaction that I do, it's always Elise Leroux is the person that is going to manage that transaction for me. Even though if we later appoint another person out there, but the bottom line is Elise, she is my go-to person. Now, Elise has all my FICA documents, and Elise, I trust her very much because she's working for me and from a service provider. And on top of that, she's got a trust account where I can put in my deposit instead of giving it to someone else whom I don't know, right? How do you verify that the conveyancer's trust account is legit? What if it's just another account somewhere out there, Taurai Jack's account, and it's being utilized as a trust account? How do you know, right? These things, they have happened before, right? So all I'm just saying is here, tip number 1, what you need to be doing is that you befriend the estate agent so that you're part of the power team, if I call it that way, your conveyancer or your attorney, you use them in the transaction. Chances are, if the seller was not so clued on about that, they're going to trust the estate agent, because remember, the estate agent is working for the seller. So that's the first tip there. Very easy. I'm sure it is very straightforward. I'm sure you got it right. The second one is that you can actually engage the seller and advise the seller that you've been working with a conveyancer, John Brown, attorneys, right? And John Brown is actually a good conveyancer, and they've been working with you for the last X years, and they give you a 50%, they give you a 90% discount, because remember, you're the one who's going to pay for this services, isn't it? So even if they're giving you a 90% discount, Like the seller is not bothered about how much you're going to pay. They're just worried about how much they're going to get out of the day. Because remember, when the seller is selling, what's going to affect their bottom line or in their pocket is the commission that is coming through from the estate agent, right? So for this case, they actually don't care, right? So if you say I get 90% from this year, that's a substantial discount where anyone, right, in their right mind, if they say, oh, you actually get 90% from your attorney. Okay, all right. Yeah, that's a great savings. Yes, yes. And they agree with you on the spot, right there. And that's how you can actually get to have a conveyancer in there. Tip number 2 is that sometimes, right, sometimes the deal is so good, right? Let's just assume you're buying a property, and on this property it is worth R1,000,000, okay? And you are banking in gross income of 30,000, right? For me, a lot of people then start saying, you need to negotiate. For me, I'm like, it's a 30,000 rand gross income project. It's R1,000,000. Why should I be negotiating? How about I say to them, you know what? I am prepared to pay 1.50, right? 1,150,000 on here. So I'm giving you more than what you're asking me, but my only condition is that I can use my own attorney. All of a sudden, the person is like, all right, I'm getting more money for my back here for selling my property. So obviously they're going to say yes, right? Or you don't even need to go the extra route of giving in an additional 50,000. How about you just give them the 1,000,000 that they're asking for? Give them the asking price, and let be your only condition. Your only condition is I want to have my conveyancer as the conveyancer for this transaction. But if you're not giving me that opportunity, then I'm giving you 800,000. That changes the conversation all of a sudden, right? So I'm sure you can see there on tip number 3, it can work out in both ways. You can still negotiate. It's a win-win, right? So you negotiate or you give in a little bit more, and then you get what you're looking for. And what are you looking for? To get the conveyancer. That's your goal, right? The deal already makes sense. Tip number 4, it's almost married to tip number 2. So remember on tip number 2, we said you can actually advise the seller that you get good rates from the conveyancer. Now, this time round on tip number 4, you actually don't talk about it, right? You don't talk about it, and the offer to purchase it will come, and all you do is you just cancel there, or you just add in a Les Leroux on the offer to purchase. Like, yeah, like, don't talk about it, right? Many people don't read contracts. Many people, they don't. I've heard many a times when people say to me, all they saw was the 1,000,000 that they were looking for, isn't it? So they saw the offer to purchase 1,000,000, and anything else they didn't look. So I literally cancelled their attorney and I put in mine in there, right? Or maybe the offer to purchase came to me as blank. Many estate agents like to do that. So they want the seller, they want the buyer to sign first before the seller. And then what they'll do is, if I put in my own conveyancer in there, what does that mean? It basically means that when they are signing, they've accepted. So we're not talking about it. It's not a conversation. I am just saying that in the contract I've stipulated who is going to be the conveyancer. Later now, when you are now saying the conveyancer is my John Brown, and all of a sudden you want to choose Susan, no, that's not what we signed for. What we signed for is for John, and John is the conveyance. If you don't want, well, But remember, an offer to purchase is actually a document that you can enforce. It's a legal binding document. So what you have put in there, and if you want it to be enforced, you can be as stubborn as you want, and you can stick to the contract. Just make sure that you're on the right side. Yeah? You can stick to it. It's a legal document. So you don't think of selling your house and then you change your mind along the way. You get sued for that. You know? You get sued for that. So that was my tip number 4. Tip number 5 is, I think it's very much married also to tip number 2 and number 3. Actually, all of my tips, they're all married to each other. Tip number 5 is that in many cases, we don't get what we are looking for because we don't ask. Right? So the other parties actually don't know. So this tip here is very obvious. It is a common sense one. And the tip is to just ask. Just ask. Oh, that's all you need to do. Just ask. So you don't need to use any tactics. You don't need to be using any jargon. Just say to the seller or to the estate agent, may I use my own conveyancer? Please. And who knows? They might actually just say yes. Because they might have not even knowing any conveyancers out there for themselves. Okay. So I want us to talk about something here. And this here that I want us to talk about is, why then should you go through all these problems and going through all these tips? And why would you want to do that? And I want to give you guys a story of a deal that I bought. I didn't eventually buy the property, but I paid for this property. It was a deal that I bought in October 2019. It was a block of 9 units that we bought, and it was a good deal. We're going to get around about 40,000 out of that property. We had bought it for 1.4. We put in our offer to purchase, and what happened was that after we put in our offer to purchase of 1.4, we thought we were going to buy this and quickly renovate, and I was going to take it to the bank, and that whole system that's called buy, renovate, rent, and refinance. Right. So that's the process that I was going to be taking. So I paid cash for it, and the money went through to the conveyancer. This is not my conveyancer. It was the seller's conveyancer. And when that happened, the 1.4 was now stuck there. Okay? October came by, it went. November came by, it went. And February came by, and it went. This is now in 2020. And then COVID came in. But I don't want to blame COVID on this transaction, because they could have done their work. All of the other work could have been done. But some of the other issues that we then hit into on this particular transaction was that the first one was that the conveyancer never shared with us up until to a time when we was jumping up and down to say, why are you not lodging? They never shared with us that the title deed was lost. So I said, okay, fine, if the title deed is lost, how come we haven't asked for a duplication? And we realized that, well, they hadn't actually done that. And now it is round about month number 9, and we are fighting. That was the first thing. The second thing was that in the offer to purchase, we had also said that they will do the COC. And in all of my offer to purchases these days, and this is a tip that you can guys take, this is out of this year that we're talking about. We did speak about it last week when I was talking with Bevan, is that on the offer to purchase these days, I actually offer to do the COC with my own electrician, but the seller needs to pay for the service, just like the conveyancer system. But why am I doing that? It is because on this particular property that I bought for 1.4, what happened was that the COC on the property, it was a run-down building. So there was no way we could get COCs on it. There was no way. There was no way. Because they needed to actually rig the entire building again with wiring. They couldn't, so they came up with this 20,000 rand that was going to be rewiring the building. And I was like, 20 grand, seriously? That doesn't sound right. So fortunately, on the offer to purchase, we had also said that our technician was going to check and we were going to make it a satisfactory condition. In the same breath, we had actually paid the transfer cost as well to their tenant, which is a big bummer. Don't ever do that. Don't do that. My learning curve now as of 2019 is I don't pay transfer fees until all of my conditions have been met, and then thereafter I pay my transfer fees. Because if you don't do that, there's no one who's really going to fight for you, because the estate agent is ready to receive his money. The conveyancers, they are ready to lodge. So who's going to fight for you? Nobody. So I want to come back to the story now we've got the first issue, the title deed are lost. The second one is that we're getting running around with the COC, right? The third party is that it's been 9 months and all of our cash is with this conveyancer. Then somewhere along the line, we actually realized that in the offer to purchase, it did stipulate that the COC needs to be produced within 14 days, right? So we put them on terms based on the offer to purchase, and we went to them and we said, we are giving you 14 days from today, and within those 14 days, the offer to purchase, you guys need to produce the COC. 14 days came by and they didn't. And for that reason, we then said we are going to pull out of the deal, because now we were now on month number 11. And we said we are going to pull out of the deal, and we asked the conveyancer to refund our money. Now, this would have been an average of 1.4 plus the interest paid, or should I say the interest earned for this entire period. Well, a lot of things happened on that deal. So the conveyancer now threatened, or should I say the seller threatened to take me to court because I am cancelling the deal. And the deal now, at this time, they had now received duplication of the title deed. And I did say I'd put you on terms as the document or the offer to purchase had actually done. And before that, I'd actually consulted with Elise and everyone else in our team. And out of that, we then realized that they had no ground to stand on, because we put them on terms on something that they were supposed to perform on. They didn't perform. We were now on day number 30, right? And for that reason, we pulled out. Now getting our money back. Oh, Lord. We asked for that money. And we asked for that money. Then there is another big brother. And that big brother is called the Law Society. We literally had to threaten them to say that we were going to take them to the Law Society. And then eventually that's when they gave in the money. But they didn't deposit all of the money. They only deposited the 1.4. And then I had to ask the question, hey, where is my interest? Where is my transfer? And they wanted to claim what is called wastage. Wastage is just basically now them wanting to claim all of the monies, or should I say the work that they have done. And we're like, hold on, you can't claim wastage because you are the one who's stealing the deal and your seller. So if you want to claim any wastage, claim from your seller, because they were the ones that were not performing in this case. But had I not performed, then yes, I would have been liable for the wastage, right? But I want to guys give you an example of this to say, this is some of the things that can literally go wrong. Now, let's turn the tables. Had the 1.4 million been with Elise, who is my attorney, would I have gone through these hoops to get my money? The answer is no. Had I used Elise, who is my conveyancer, in the beginning, when would we have known that the title deed is missing? A long time ago. Could we have acted upon it? Yes. Why? Because we have the interest of buying the property. Okay? So whatever things that is now happening there to stall the deal, for whatever reason that we don't know, all of a sudden, I am the seller, I'm the buyer, and I'm stuck in between. My money is there, but I don't have access to the property. Okay, TJ, what if you had the early occupation? That's a different conversation, because now maybe I might be getting some profits from there, but I wasn't, right? Now, do you see the importance of actually having your own conveyancer? I am sure that by now you now like truly understand, having told you these two stories that have happened to me in this year and last year alone. There's plenty others. And if you do have any questions, you can ask any questions in the comments there. I will address them. But I think tonight we have gone through, we have exhausted this conversation. We can go on around it. But if this is something that you've been enjoying to do, you're enjoying listening to, and you've been listening to this, great. But if you have never subscribed, this is the time. You can actually click on the subscription button there, and also on the notification button. And out of that, whenever we are live like this, you get to have the notifications. And if you're watching this, at another time, and it wasn't now, there's plenty of other videos that we have done that you can jump into that are also educational as much as we've been doing on this one. Right. I am going to close off for today. But if you do have any other questions, I'm going to entertain those questions all the way to tomorrow. And actually, all comments that you guys put in, we are always answering those. To your success, I am hoping that you can actually enjoy all of these and make sure that you choose your conveyancer all the time. But on another note, if you haven't got through my book, right, this is the time that you can also get it up until around about the 15th of December. You got 10 days. That book is literally for free for you. And if you haven't got it, you can jump onto my website and you can get it. All right. Cheers. God bless. And the Christmas holidays are here. So great to have you guys around. And what are you guys doing for Christmas? Let me know in the comments in there. All right. Cheers. God bless. Goodbye.